All right, we will get started. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, a huge thank you to our panelists for joining us for this conversation. We are about a week out from midterms, and my name is Jenan Mohajir. I'm the Senior Director of Special Projects at Interfaith America. And we wanted to kind of pull together a few of our esteemed experts in who are doing work around our communities, around voting, around thinking about our elections, to basically have a conversation about our values and our democracy, and thinking about what comes next after this current election cycle, and how do we go into this next couple of years in a time of deep polarization. We're very, very honored to have three amazing people joining us for this conversation. We have Dr. Dilara Sayeed, who is the president of the Muslim Civic Coalition, Reverend Cassandra Gould, the senior strategist for faith leadership strategies at Faith in Action, and Chris Crawford, policy advocate at Protect Democracy. We're just so grateful to have you all here, and wanted to kick off this conversation with just quick introductions of your work and the amazing role that you play in our communities. We'll have their bios in the chat, so you'll get to know a little bit more about them and what they do. But of course, we wanted to invite them to tell their story directly to you all as part of this conversation. We can do a quick run of show so you all know how we'll be moving forward. Well, before we do that, we'll do a quick set of announcements. Select the CC button at the bottom of your screen and adjust the caption sizes by clicking the CC button and then the subtitle settings. You can view messages from Interfaith America and the panelists in the chat feature. Submit questions using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and you can tag Interfaith USA or Interfaith America on social media. And once a question is answered, you'll be able to see the answer. You'll be able to see that question. And of course, you'll receive a recording of this conversation in your inbox in the next few days. So with that, we'll kick off the conversation. Would love to have our panelists sort of introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their work. Dr. Reverend Cassandra Gould, if you could start us off and tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
Happy to, and thank you again, Interfaith America, for having this very timely and relevant conversation, and grateful to have the opportunity to be here. Again, Dr. Cassandra Gould, I am the senior strategist on the faith leadership strategies team at Faith in Action. Faith in Action is 50 years old this year. The largest and one of the oldest grassroots organizing, faith-based grassroots organizing organizations in the country. I'm also ordained an elder in the AME Church, and for me, this work at the intersection, basically at faith and politics, is necessary. As a Christian pastor, I believe that all of the Creator's children are made in God's image, and democracy is how we include people socially and politically. The ballot box is an equalizer. It is the place that we all get to have that one vote to lift our voices through our voting. I'm a child of the South, from a little town in Alabama that's 47 miles west of Selma, where my mother fought for voter rights. And so this work is a part of my spiritual DNA. That's just a little bit about me.
Thank you so much for that. Dr. Dilara Sayeed, please introduce yourself and tell us about your work.
Great. Thank you, Jenan. And thank you for the team at Interfaith America and all of you who are joining us today. I'm Dilara Sayeed, and really, in essence, I'm a Chicago kid. I come from a city that has such complexity, such challenges with its racial tensions, but also such wonderful people of every single background you can possibly imagine. And not great weather right now, but we'll hold that for the Alabamans to judge if they ever come up here at this time of the year. I'm also an educator. I spent most of my career in 8th grade classrooms teaching U.S. history and language arts, much of my career teaching young professionals to become educators, and then working in school systems as chief education officers. And throughout this entire time, when I did this work in the public schools, one of the things I realized is there were certainly marginalized communities, yes. Often there were also communities that were just plain invisible. We never saw them in our curriculum. We didn't teach them to our students. And when they were in our classrooms, we didn't quite understand them as our peers, our students, or our colleagues. And that's what I wanted to change. And really, in a way, that's what brought me from the public schools to the public square. Because in the end, it's about civic justice, about seeing every single person in our communities, seeing our neighbors, honoring their voices, knowing that they want what we all want, is to put food on the table, raise happy and healthy children, and to be a part of a productive society. And that's the work we do, whether we do it through making sure people vote, making sure ethical leaders are in office, making sure we count in the census and we have resources that come to us through redistricting, or making sure that we're passing just laws. All of this is just part of civic justice and making sure that each one of our stories is part of the greater American story.
Thank you, Dr. Sayeed. Can Chris please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work?
Sure. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you to my panelists and everyone tuning in. I'm Chris Crawford with Protect Democracy. First and foremost, I'm a dad. There's an almost 1-year-old on the other side of this wall napping, who you might hear at some point, but he is the person I'm fighting for his future. And it's just been a great journey for almost a year being a dad. So I like starting with that now. The first part of my career, I worked in the pro-life movement for Susan B. Anthony List. And after that experience, I went to Democracy Fund, where I managed a portfolio of faith-based grantees that was focused on equipping faith communities and faith leaders with what they needed to help defend our democracy. And in particular, to meet them where they are, to talk about pluralism through their language from their faith traditions. In 2020, in the lead up to the 2020 election, I was working on the faith portfolio, doing my work at Democracy Fund, when some folks from Protect Democracy reached out, and they were staffing the National Task Force on Election Crises, which is a cross-partisan organization of experts and leaders who are focused on protecting our elections and talking about preserving our elections, ensuring they're free and fair. And so they asked me to help with faith outreach for them. And so I just sort of dove into that. I made that my full-time job. I had done my grant making for the year and really had the honor of working with faith leaders to protect the 2020 election. And coming out of that experience, I felt like there was more work that needed to be done looking forward to 2024 and all elections beyond that, of what is needed to build infrastructure, pass laws, work with communities to ensure that we have free and fair elections and a peaceful transfer of power. And so I applied to come work at Protect Democracy, and I've been here for about a year and a half now. We are an organization primarily focused on ensuring that we do not slide into authoritarianism in this country. We are a nonpartisan organization. We work with folks across the aisle. And a lot of my work right now has been focused on, now I staff the National Task Force on Election Crises, but our big push right now legislatively is trying to get reforms to the Electoral Count Act passed in this lame duck session before the end of the year, which are really necessary to protect future elections. And so that's where a lot of my work is right now.
Thank you. And thank you all of you for joining us today for this conversation. Just to dive in, I was reading some research by Pew yesterday, by the Pew Research Center, and the Pew Research Center finds that Democrats and Republicans are farther apart ideologically today than at any time in the past 50 years. So in your view, as you are doing this work on the ground, what kind of work is needed to help bridge the gap during this really divided and polarized time? Where are you seeing this work happen? Who is leading this work? What are you seeing happening on the ground? And we'll start off with you, Dr. Sayeed, and then we'll go around. Yeah.
What a timely question, given what we just went through, right? So our democracy was not doomed during this election, as we heard it could be. It certainly wasn't also completely boosted, because we didn't have both sides come together for a holistic democracy. So basically it tells us we have a lot of work to do. And I think the middle ground is where we need to amplify the voices. Independence, right? Think of the independents and the young people that changed this election. It was the Gen Zs and the millennials who voted, who came out in droves because something they cared about was on the ballot, whatever that issue might have been for any of the sides that they are a part of. So make sure we're amplifying and promoting the young voices. And this is exactly what Interfaith America is all about, right? And then secondly, the independent voices. And I say the young and independent together because many times the young are pretty independent. Many times they're not identifying as Democrat or Republican. They're saying, you know what, I'm going to go with finding out more about the candidates. I'm going to go with who I feel good about and or who I learn more about, and who motivates me to be a better person and a better American. And not just the young people are saying that, but so are minorities. Look at where the Latino community has moved to in this last 10 years. Look at where the Muslim community has moved to in the last 10 years. We just did a recent historic report of Muslims in Illinois. And what we found is certainly about 50% plus identify as Democrats. Given where many will think of the Republican Party's perception of them, that makes sense. But you know who about 40% identified as? Independents. This means neither party should take them for granted. And this means both parties have an opportunity here. And so this is, I think, where it's at. It's right there in the middle, and the work we can do there. And also in the middle is where you build the allyships between communities, Black, brown, tan, white, rich, poor, in the middle, those overemployed, those underemployed. Like right there in the middle is that sweet spot where you're going to find people who are willing to also be good allies for each other. So getting the independents and getting the allies, that's where it's at.
Reverend Gould or Chris?
Yeah, I'll go. And I'll kind of start with your question around like who's doing this well. We're not there yet, right? I certainly have to be an evangelist of faith in action, being in more than 225 cities. Our national staff, we spend a lot of time on the ground in various cities doing this during this cycle. But last year, we also spent a lot of time through our federations having listening campaigns. And it is listening to those everyday Americans, regardless of race, zip code, all of the things that have divided us, that have really helped to inform us of how we're not there yet, right? In this last 6 weeks, I'm thinking of our federation in Pennsylvania, Power, did a bus tour, driving around and pulling people together, not just in Philadelphia, but in Harrisburg and in other places where people experience a lot of differences, where people are not always talking to their neighbors to the north or the south. One of the things that we realized through our work is that people just really want to be heard. We have been really forced into these binary constructs in the Western world. And so, you're Dem or you're Republican, you're right or you're wrong. There's no middle ground. And I think what we are seeing, even by some of the challengers, these independent challengers who have created like runoffs in Georgia based on the percentage of the vote that they took, we are seeing that this generation particularly is not adhering to these binary constructs, right? And so I think we have to be more imaginative than that, and we have to be more inclusive than that. And so I believe, particularly as a faith leader, that the more we are able to engage in conversations, we often talk about, we want to find where the common ground is. great, but we also actually have to listen, hear, and acknowledge our differences and be able to actually appreciate the differences. We are not all the same. And so I think that particularly for people of faith during this time, we have a really great opportunity to do some, to use John Powell's language, to do some bridging, to actually allow people to conversate with each other, to see each other, right? So that we can be seen, so that we understand that everybody has something to say. But I also think that there's a way in which we have to center on morality, humanity, and if any side is actually diminishing a person's or a group of people's humanity, then as people of faith, we have something to say about that.
I agree with so much of what both of you already covered. I think the little piece that I want to highlight, one of my big takeaways from this election was I was humbled, and I think a lot of people in DC were humbled by this election, because I think we don't give voters enough credit for the agency that they have. And I think voters, especially the independents, showed that our democracy is worth fighting for, our institutions are worth fighting for. When you look at the different races statewide in a lot of the swing states, the candidates who ran against our election system, undermining the results of the 2020 election, casting doubt on our election system, they not only lost, those candidates ran well behind the rest of the Republicans, sometimes by double digits. And I think there was a message sent that people actually believe in our democracy, believe in our institutions. And there's two problems when you're running in that way as a candidate. The first is that the independents don't like that, and so they move away from you. But the other is, if you're constantly running on a platform that the system is corrupt and that everything's bad, and you're trying to send that message to your base, they're going to throw their hands in the air and stay home. And we've seen that in studies, that people who are disillusioned by some of these messages choose not to vote. And so it's actually, I think we're at an inflection point where people see this is a political loser. It's not just the wrong thing to do. And sometimes in our politics, that tipping point really comes from when it becomes a political problem rather than just a sort of moral problem. And so I'm really interested in what happened with voters in this election. As far as what happens next, talking about my experience at Protect Democracy and working sort of on the congressional level in particular, what we've been able to do, or what Congress has been able to do in their approach to trying to reform the Electoral Count Act of 1887, which is the law that guides the casting and counting of electoral votes. It's badly outdated and needs to be fixed. They've been focusing on trying to come together, finding areas of agreement, respecting each other, and listening. Everyone recognizes inside and outside of Congress, this bill is not going to be written the way any of us would have written it if we had the pen. But getting this done is more important because it will prevent violence on January 6th in the future. It will make it harder to try to overturn the will of the people. And so there's this sense of mission that will put aside all the other issues and even some of the issues related to this topic in order to get something done that improves our democracy. And I'd love to see that across the board, even on divisive issues. I am still pro-life, and there are big disagreements. There are big divisions on that right now, but I'm really interested in the conversation on how can we put some of our differences aside and provide more for moms and babies and families. And so in my personal life, that's a big focus of mine. And we've seen it in my home state of Maryland, Democrats and Republicans passing tax credits for donations of feminine hygiene products and diapers, things like that. People coming together across very wide differences to try to provide for people in their communities. And I'd like to see a lot more of that.
Thank you for that, and thank you for your comments as well, Reverend Gould. One of the things that I'm hearing all of you sort of reference, and I want to kind of pinpoint to that because obviously we're Interfaith America, is the role of faith leaders and faith communities in this particular moment. I think all of you have referenced that in your comments. I'm wondering if we can have a more direct conversation around what is the role of faith communities right now? How can faith leaders and faith communities help protect our democracy while also working towards closing the polarization, that gap that currently exists? And how is that possible to do? Have you seen some of that are you in your work, in your organizations, are you doing some of that? I know Reverend Gould, you mentioned this very specifically and would love to hear more about how that's happening in local communities across the country.
Yeah, thank you for that. So for me, as a faith leader, one of the things that we strongly remind faith leaders of in our work through faith leadership strategies at Faith in Action is that we are still the narrators of America. No matter how bad the homily, the speech, the sermon at our mosques, temples, congregations, or in our Zoom room, somebody's going to come back next week and listen again. And so it's important, honestly, that we actually start to have conversations that some faith leaders have shied away from. It is important, and not conversations that are merely mirroring political rhetoric, right? But like real heartfelt conversations around the human cost, right? The impact on people's lives when we are in this kind of hate-filled, not just news cycle, right? But just a hate-filled political and social environment. I believe that faith has something to say about everything. I'm reminded from Dr. Aubrey Hendricks, who's a scholar and a theologian. His most recent book, Christians Against Christianity. So he talks about this rise of white Christian nationalism, but he also critiques I think he calls it the salient silence and he's talking about Christians of churches who might be to the left of the center and those who might have a different perspective, and even those who might find themselves on the right using those political themes. But there is something that needs to be said, right? And I think one of the things that we saw even in this election through independents, through Black people, other people of color, through the Gen Zers, is that people want something to be said, right? It was in some ways a referendum on a system that says it's either left or it's right. And so I think as faith leaders, we have a responsibility to actually start to address some of these things, to honestly, in many ways, to examine our own theology. We train an awful lot of faith leaders across the country through Faith in Action. And part of that training is not just around community organizing principles, but also the deep spiritual formation. We'll be starting a multi-faith, multiracial, gender equitable solidarity cohorts next year. And those cohorts are really designed so that people can also even go deeper in their own theological formation as it pertains to these issues, that people show up in our Zoom rooms, in our mosque temples and congregations, waiting for us to weigh in on. And oftentimes leave very disappointed because we have nothing to say, because we want to just kind of appease to everybody. And make everybody happy. And so I think it's a time period when faith leaders have to become uncomfortable and sometimes make others uncomfortable so that we can again do some bridging so that everybody has a place to belong.
Chris or Dilara, your thoughts on this? How can faith leaders play a role right now?
I wrote so much of that down, Reverend Gould, because I think it's so powerful and so important. But I think something related to what you're talking about is I do think we have in our public life a problem that stems from a crisis in Christian formation as people are approaching their public life. I think that too many people are driven by their partisan political identity, racial identities, other identities, and they're slapping a faith label onto it, or they're sort of casting aside what should be some of their faith values. I used to hear from pastors, we get people for an hour on Sunday morning, cable news gets them for 10 to 15 hours a week. And I think that ends up being reflected often in the way people, especially our leaders, are engaging in public life. What I'm especially interested in right now is the work in individual faith communities, where there are leaders standing up and providing the message of what a different type of public life can look like. How can we take the faith values and the sort of deep well of morality and try to turn that into political action that drives our politics rather than is being driven by our political parties? And so I think Mormon Women for Ethical Government is one group that I absolutely love, that I do a lot of work with. The Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life at Georgetown University is excellent. And I'll also make a plug for, I'm a founding board member of Michael Weir's new project, the Center for Christianity and Public Life, that's really focused on the formation of Christian leaders and pushing back on some of what we've seen. The last thing I'd like to see more of, that I see this as a challenge for me as much as anybody else, is trying to bring the joy of our faith lives into the public square, and trying to bring light to the public square. It's so easy to see some of the darkness and just sort of be overwhelmed by that. But I think living out our faith can bring a joyful witness to the public life that could be really valuable. Not joy that's unrealistic or ignores the problems that we have and the injustices, but to be joyful in fighting for justice. That's sort of my personal thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with both of you so much. And I'm, Chris, as you are, I was writing things down as well. I spent a lot of years saying, oh, I'm not a faith leader, I'm not a religious scholar, I'm a teacher. and many years saying, I'm just a mom, I'm trying to figure this out, I'm a community activist, working within grassroots organizing. And someone said to me, but that is faith. That is leadership and faith. Don't run away from it. Own it. And so I unapologetically now is like, we come to this work because we're called to this work. Justice is the hallmark of every single one of our faiths. Equity is the hallmark of every single one of our faiths. Inclusion is the hallmark of our faiths. And so when we do this work for all people, we are doing this work because our Creator called us to do it. And that is our faith every day, whether it's on your head as a scarf or you wear it on your sleeve in the work that you do, right? And so, and in activism and faith, I got to just be honest, I learned that from the AME Church. Chicagoland has a very empowered AME community. And whether it's Reverend Moody of Quinn Chapel, which is the first AME church in Chicagoland area, or Walter Johnson, who's the president of the AME churches in Chicagoland. Like, we see how on the south side and the west sides of Chicago, the churches where Black pastors and reverends taught, they didn't just teach us to pray, they taught us to pray and to work for the community. And so that's the Muslim way. And so it just brought out for me everything that my mother and our Sunday schools had taught us. And then I would meet as a Golden Apple education officer, I would go to rural Illinois often, or other places in the nation. And I'm going to rural churches where there are white communities, and they're saying the same thing. So, faith is everything we do when we work towards equity and justice. And we do it because we are faith-driven people. So there's no difference. And I think we are all in that way. We have our differences. A rabbi once told me, I got to tell you this joke. A rabbi once told me, Dilara, we're all just the same. We all believe in Jesus. We just have a different job description for him. The Jewish people are waiting for him to come. The Muslim people believe that he has come and was raised up. And the Christian believe that he came as the Son of God. But we all believe in him and his message of love and mercy to the world. And so I'm not minimizing it, but thought I'd throw a religious joke in there because we all have heard them.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for all of your comments. As you all were speaking, I was reminded of the ways that at Interfaith America, we think about the spaces that we create, which are spaces that are inclusive and expansive, where people are, welcomed in as their whole selves and welcomed in with with all of their convictions and their beliefs. And it's recognizing that we will have shared values in that space. We will have, as we like to use the potluck metaphor, we will have lots of dishes that we can share. And then there will be dishes that maybe not all of us can participate in eating and sharing. And there will be those deep disagreements, as many of you mentioned, that we will have to sit with in that space. My question to you all is, I'm wondering, what does that look like? What does it look like to have a room where there is a recognition of deep disagreement, while also lifting shared values as the thing that binds us together, and not necessarily putting away the disagreements, but actually leaning into them and knowing that there's a foundational relationship, there's a foundational anchor to help, navigate that deep disagreement. The polarization that we have right now feels so much like we just have no way of navigating those disagreements. They just take over the conversation. So I'm curious, in the work that you all have done, how can we actually help people navigate that? What does that look like? What do we need to do as we go into those rooms and spaces? And how do we build some of those relationships so that we're able to then navigate the difficult conversations that we need to have? Chris, do you want to start us off on some of that?
Sure. I think my colleagues probably have more experience and can get into the weeds of it a little bit more, but I think generally it takes a great amount of trust to put those rooms together and for people to come to the table. You have to know that the people there are looking out for you and looking out for what they think is good for the group, even if there are big disagreements and even what that might look like. I think there has to be that foundational level of trust in order to bring people together. I also think we need to value the contributions of people who are different from us and try to learn from them. That's one thing that I've noticed over time, is that if it's just about, oh, that person represents the largest group of religious people, so we want them at the table, or this person is connected to these people, so we want to have them at the table, it doesn't go as well and it's harder to build that trust. So I think there has to be a sense that you're working generally in the same direction and you value the contributions of everyone, and that you'll listen with an ear toward being convinced or changing your perspective. And I think that part's really important and can be some of the hardest part. I know I've gone into those rooms thinking, here's the message I want to get across, and it's the most important, and I want to drive this thing in a certain direction. And that always goes poorly. You have to go in trying to listen and work together.
I'll jump in.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Because what Chris said really hit me. Thank you for bringing up the word trust, right? That we have to build trust. And in our work as civic justice activists, we believe trust is built in doing the work. Many times one of the challenges I feel about interfaith work is that we have great meals, we sit down, we break bread together, and that's wonderful, and we like tuck it to each other, but then we leave and then it's like the next event and we break bread together. I think it's the work that builds trust. So 2 examples. I'm in Springfield right now, sitting in my car before I get to a meeting with the Senate president, asking him to support a bill. This bill is a bill that requires everyone, all organizations that are funded or state supported, such as our public schools, our prisons, and our hospitals, have an option of kosher or halal foods, which makes sense. It's a common sense law, like options like that available so that hospitalized individuals can have access to foods. And those in prison and incarcerated who can't get their food otherwise are getting the kind of foods that they need. But to pass this bill, we had to build a coalition of Christian pastors and priests who then were supporting this because it was the right thing to do for those who were vegetarian, etc., in prisons. Muslim imams and faith communities that wanted halal, because we have such a huge halal community in our state and in our areas, and then of course the Jewish community. So when you're talking about not only billions of dollars of industry and monies that come into the state, we're talking about large numbers of populations impacted, and we're talking about the right thing to do. put them together, put them across faith values, and you've got now an incredibly supported law that will pass with God's grace in the veto session in the next week, but it will be a collaboration between Jews, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, who also are vegetarian in their meals. And so this is work. We're building trust. We're doing this because our faith calls us to do it. And we're doing it because it's a common sense law that we need to follow in our state. So it's just one example, but I think it's that example of like, what does that look like? Where's the intersection while we do the work?
Thank you. I'm going to piggyback off of that, Chris, that word trust. I can't trust you if I don't know you. And so part of the work through Faith in Action is relational organizing, which looks really different than we all just show up at an action together. You do your part, I do my part, and we go home and we'll see you the next time, you know, something's going crazy in our community. And so we really train people at the grassroots level, including faith leaders, around building relationships. One of my stops during this election cycle was Buffalo, which is now near and dear to my heart. I was there on behalf of Faith in Action immediately in the aftermath of the massacre. And I sat with faith leaders this last week, Black faith leaders, white faith leaders, Muslim faith leaders across traditions. When I was there, I recognized that there was not the kind of relationships, the kind of trust, right? Even amongst faith leaders. And so doing this work really well means actually investing in relationships. And when I invest in relationship with you, then I'm able to build trust and I'm able to value you and I'm able to see you, to understand maybe the tradition that you represent, maybe even the race that you are, beyond the narratives and the tropes that we have been conditioned by. I'm able to say, in the words of Reverend Tex Sample, I'm able to people not just a problem, but people even the promise. I'm able to say, no, see, this is Chris. We don't agree on these issues. However, this is what Chris represents, and this is who Chris is, right? And I value Chris as a person, and I'm not then stymied by the fact that, oh, okay, you're pro-life, I'm pro-choice, so we're not going to ever like meet in the middle. But when I see you as a person and I develop relationship with you, then we're able to actually move forward together in ways that are not so superficial. I think we often want to rush to, you know, these kumbaya moments that we're all just getting along. We can't get along if we don't know each other, right? And so we really work at Faith in Action around helping people to get to know each other in ways that says we are in relationship enough with each other that I can go with you around an issue that may not directly impact me, but because I'm in relationship with you, I'll be more than an ally. I always invite people into being an accomplice. These multi-faith, multiracial, gender equitable solidarity cohorts that we'll be rolling out next year will really be, relationship will really be at the center of those. Then we can do justice together.
Thank you so much. I think something that one of my colleagues at Interfaith America has said oftentimes is people are poems, not tropes. So kind of thinking about how, you know, the humanity of someone is as a whole being and being able to build relationship with that and not necessarily putting them into boxes based on a couple of different political opinions or categories. So thank you for that. Thank you, all of you. for that. I wanted to also, I know we're coming to towards the end of our time, and we're going to open up for questions in just a minute, but all of you serve on this really important project at Interfaith America called The Vote is Sacred, and you are all trusted advisors on that project with us. And I wanted to kind of throw a question out along those lines. I know we've just come past the midterms. We're going into probably 2 years or a year and some of lots of election talk as we in the lead up to the 2024 election. Wanted to ask you, what does it mean that the vote is sacred? What does that mean to you? What does that mean to the work that you do? Tell us a little bit about that.
I loved the title. So when the team approached me to be part of the council, I think the title grabbed me because I do believe, as we've all talked about earlier, this is part of our faith to do this work, and this is part of our faith to vote, to advocate for just laws, to build relationships with our public officials, and so I think doing this work with universities and colleges and the people who are listening that are educators and doing it with them and in community with them is absolutely critical. And then of course doing it everywhere, whether you're going to a senior center or a library or a community center, doing this work everywhere is really critical. Yesterday, a dear brother and friend, the president and CEO of Field Foundation, we were having a round table of philanthropy, and we were talking about, yes, we are marginalized. Many communities of color can absolutely see that. And I said it earlier, but we need to see each other. Sometimes we're just invisible and we don't see each other. And then Daniel said, yes, but we see what we want to see. And so I think vote is sacred is that space where we can say, with intentionality, we're going to make sure you see not just what you want to see, but all of us who are here. And so I think that's one of the ways that I see this work is all of us coming together and being intentional about making sure that our voices are heard through our vote and we are seen as residents and the people who make up America through this work. So you don't just get to see what you want to see, you get to see us all.
I love that. I'd like to go next because I have a little different relationship with the name of Vote is Sacred. As a Catholic, we sort of have very rigid definitions of certain things, and sacred is one of them. So there's disagreement among Catholics of whether it's appropriate to call the vote sacred. What I can say is that I think it's extremely important, and that it is a part of how we can serve each other and how we can determine the direction of our own lives and our shared lives together, which is why I want to be a part of the Vote is Sacred effort. I think there's a few reasons that the vote is so important from a faith perspective. Dr. Barbara Williams Skinner and Jim Wallace have talked a lot about denying the right to vote is rejecting the idea of the Imago Dei. It's an assault on the dignity of people if you're taking away their agency to vote. And I feel very strongly in agreement with that. And I've quoted them anytime I've talked about this to any group. I also think we need to be able to ensure that everyone has a say in trying to build a future that serves everyone, to create more just laws and more just systems, especially with, to use Catholic language, a preferential option for the poor, keeping in mind people who are marginalized. So I think the vote is so important to getting us there. And it's a central human dignity concern from my Catholic perspective. I'm excited about the work, especially with college students, because I think we're seeing a lot of disillusionment among younger people with our institutions. And I think there's going to be a lot of creativity about what needs to be broken, what needs to be reformed, what needs to be uplifted. And it's going to be, I think I'm going to learn a lot as a quote unquote thought leader, which I kind of laugh at being included as a thought leader. But I think I'm going to learn a lot in the engagement that we have through Vote is Sacred, while also trying to be thoughtful myself about how to shape the program to both inspire college students and their communities, while also figuring out how we can work to build a more just democracy together.
So for me, as a Black woman who is the great granddaughter of Joanna Essig, who was born during the worst time in our country, a period of enslavement, in the Black Belt of Alabama, it is sacred. So I'm Methodist, I'm African Methodist. We only got 2 sacraments, communion and baptism. But when I think about that which was sacrificed so that people who look like me could vote, when I think about my mother who in 1965 was on that bridge in Selma with John Lewis, who spent the night in jail on Bloody Sunday, who left this earth with a gash on her leg from being beaten, trying to register people to vote. And think about all the blood that was shed so that I could vote. It is certainly sacred because lives have been sacrificed. And so I am so honored to be a part of this particular committee at Interfaith America because I maintain that the vote is sacred. I do recognize that this kind of a generational thing too. There are people who are younger than me, I think, who might be too far removed from the stories around the sacrifice, and who have experienced so much loss that losing blood for some of them has been normalized that they may not think of it as sacred. But as we say in Christianity, as for me and my house, the vote is still sacred. And I do this work through Faith in Action. I do this work really since I was a young girl because of the sacrifices that were made. And I'm still hoping in this lame duck session that we can further protect voting rights because the vote is sacred.
Thank you so much to all of you for being vulnerable and for sharing with us and giving us an insight into your own work and also your own being as a person of faith, as a person who's leading some of the work here in this space with us. So we're really grateful for that. I'll invite any questions from our participants. If there are any, please let us know. You can put it in the Q&A. I'm happy to read them out loud. So let us know. And if there aren't any, then I'm happy to close out the conversation and give everybody 10 minutes back, because I know especially some of our speakers have hard stops at noon. So I want to respect your time and the commitments that we made to you. There is a lovely comment in the Q&A, Dilara, for you, thanking you for the work on the bill that you are trying to move forward right now at the 12 o'clock hour, and for folks specifically for folks who are incarcerated and who are in learning settings as well. And just a gratitude to you for doing that work. So thank you for doing that.
You're very welcome. If I can just add, and sometimes it's easy to speak for those who can also just speak for themselves. It's the courageous leaders that we hope will speak for those who can't often speak for themselves. You know, the other bill we actually have is fully for prisons. Incarcerated brothers and sisters often don't get access to imams and priests and people of all different backgrounds of faith. And many times for mental health and wellness, that's the first person they'll tell what they need. And so we want to make sure that there's access, not just to provide religious services, but to talk to faith leaders of all background for all our incarcerated. And if you want to look at some of our bills and pass them in your state, we will give you the template of how to pass those bills in your state. If we pass it in one state, it's not enough. We have to pass it in all of the states and then make this law. So thank you for noticing that. But we have so many people who, again, don't have voice that we have to give voice to and help have voice.
Thank you. We did have one question come in, and I would love like a lightning round response from all of you on this question. So The question is, what thoughts do you have about the language that might reach people of faith who might be falling into authoritarian tendencies in these elections? So what thoughts do you have about language that might reach people of faith who might be falling into authoritarian tendencies in these elections? So I know we're coming to a close, so I would love some quick thoughts around that from you all. Does anyone want to get us started? Does anyone have thoughts right away? I know it's a hard question to end with.
Yeah, I'm going to make this my last comment. I'm reminded of words that Dr. King quoted that were actually Augustine's. Unjust laws or no laws at all. And so I think oftentimes, Chris talked about that Christian formation specifically. Sometimes there's this formation, right? Which is why enslavement got to go on, because we just, bow down to the government. It's what everybody's saying should happen. So the church just sat quietly and benefited from it. And so I think that when we actually start to interrogate and give people permission to think for themselves and to think how this actually lines up with what they know about faith, it might actually start to diminish some of the authoritarian tendencies for people of faith.
Yeah, thank you for that. Chris or Dilara, any thoughts on that?
Sure. I think that's right, first of all. And I think for Christians, especially, reminding them that Jesus is Lord, Caesar is not, and putting the right focus on public life versus religious life and how we treat our politicians, and not to make idols out of state power or politicians, where I think we sort of have an issue with that sometimes. In a more narrow focus of the importance of upholding our elections and that element of authoritarianism, I often try to remind people that all of our freedoms rest upon free and fair elections and our transfer of power. If we don't have those things, we won't have our religious freedom. We won't be able to be active on any political issue we care about, any justice issue that we care about, if we tear down the institutions that provide our opportunity to work on those issues and change the way that things are structured. It relies on free and fair elections at a foundation. And can I also say thank you again? I've learned so much from all of you today, and I'm so appreciate the way you all have engaged. So thank you very much.
And can I just +1 what they just said?
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you all so much for such an insightful and life-giving conversation. I'm really grateful that we have all of you within our network and within our catalog of friends. So we're just really grateful for the work that you're doing, and we're grateful for the ways in which you are living out your values and making America an Interfaith America. So thank you so much. And that will close us out. Just a couple of quick announcements. Please check out our other virtual opportunities at interfaithamerica.org/event. And to learn more about The Vote is Sacred, please check out our Interfaith America magazine and also Interfaith America website, where The Vote is Sacred has a page. We'd love for you to get involved. I'm so grateful for all of you for tuning in and for being part of this conversation. And thank you again to Chris, Dr. Dilara Sayeed, and Dr. Gould for joining us. And that's all from us, folks. Until next time, thank you.
Thank you.